just record it on the computer. So tonight we were supposed to do our 2-minute speech. So you're ready? Okay. Yeah. So I'm going to switch this. And, you know, most of the times presentations are made standing. So we'll go ahead and have you stand. What we'll do, this ought to be interesting to see. We'll stop the share. And I'm going to turn this around. I hope you can see yourself.
Yep. You kind of see that.
Okay. So then I'll sit over off to the side and let the computer record you that way. Your classmates will have the fun watching it.
Okay.
All right.
Well, good evening. I'm Carol Ann Allison, and I work in the purchasing department of Crop Production Services. I'm out of Loveland, Colorado as a procurement coordinator. This company does everything from manufacturing to farm. I personally work in the chemical purchasing department, purchasing crop chemicals such as Roundup, Startup, and Liberty, and other various products for the providences of for the provinces of Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba, Canada. I even get to travel there and see how the business operates at least once a year. It's pretty cold in Canada. The town I go to is Regina in Saskatchewan, Canada. Now in this position, I purchase the chemicals needed for crops such as wheat and corn. With these crop types, I need to purchase many different chemicals for them during our in-season time frame. The in-season time frame is typically April through September. It can vary though depending on the weather. It snows a lot in Canada. When purchasing these chemicals, sometimes billing issues arise such as price variance, product mishaps, or otherwise. Today, I'm going to speak about how these invoice issues arise and how they can be fixed and avoided in the purchasing world. We're going to discuss how I work with the branch to correct a price variance on the purchase order. First, let's look at how a pricing variance happens. This is most common with our smaller suppliers that we don't use on a regular basis. Typically, the supplier has not sent out an updated price list and the price list we have is older. Another way this happens is when the purchasing coordinator, myself, mistypes a number in the price on the purchase order that is submitted to the supplier. The price list not being updated and sent to me is the most common issue that may arise again with the smaller suppliers, as I'm double checking my work consistently. Now, to start to fix this issue, you need to have your branch, who is responsible for the inventory of each product in their warehouse, cancel out the receiver that is entered. The receiver is an electronic note showing that the product has been received at the warehouse. This blocks any changes being made to the original purchase order, like price changes, quantity changes, etc. The branch would need to go into the system and cancel this receiver temporarily to free the purchase order to have changes made. In order to get the branch to cancel out the receiver, I do need to explain why the purchasing or the price variance happened and how it will affect their P&L or their profit and loss statement. And this is part of the persuasion process to get them to temporarily throw inventory off, showing in the system that they did not receive the product. As you can see in my illustration, throwing off the inventory. Finally, I get the word back from the branch that they agree the price needs corrected and they have canceled out the receiver. Then I'm ready to correct the price on the purchase order and send the invoices in for processing. Before I send the invoice in, guess what needs to be done? That's right, branch needs to receive the product in. Then our accounts payable department can fully process the invoice and get the supplier paid. So when getting a price variance, it is important to check with your supplier and make sure that you have the updated price list and that you have the correct price on the purchase order. In business, unfortunately, though, this is something that is all too common, especially in the heat of the season. One thing that helps eliminate invoice issues, such as pricing variances, is to make sure your communication is open with all of your suppliers. This means even the small suppliers, even though that can be hard during the heat of the busy season, as you don't talk to them very often. Now, I'll take any questions from the audience.
Okay, a question I have is how you deal with exchange rate variation. That's going to have an effect on pricing as well. Talking about cross-border
Yes.
transactions.
Yep.
So how do you deal with those?
It's
it doesn't change on a daily basis. I know most people use LIBOR, but I don't. But it's still that changes on a daily basis.
Yep, and when we do create our purchase orders, it's automatically built into the system to do the Canadian pricing. Once we have a price list in effect, it's Canadian pricing. If they say $40.20 Canadian, it's $40.20, or should be. So it's something that's set in stone. We have that Canadian variant, so the U.S. office, when they pay, they're paying in Canadian dollars, not U.S. dollars.
Makes sense. We've had some recent news about trade tariffs and stuff going on. Is that thought to possibly be an issue? Because agricultural trade back and forth between Canada and the U.S.
Yes, it is. Right now, I haven't run into that quite yet. I assume I'm going to run into that very quickly. There are some of our suppliers that are on the U.S. side that we're shipping directly from the U.S. to Canada, whether it be Manitoba or Alberta. A lot of our suppliers, though, do manufacture and have a lot of the product in Canada already, so we don't have to deal with that tariff. But there will be the off cases we will. Haven't run into it yet, though.
Yeah. Well, that's very interesting because I have had to deal with that. So and it makes sense now. Just sitting here when we started, I thought an invoice is an invoice, right?
You would think. Yep. But there can be a lot of things.
I see that we can't just obviously.
Yep. Along with the branches, it helps to keep that line of communication open with your coworkers, which are the branches, your suppliers, everybody. You don't have it open and then you run into issues and it takes a long time to fix.
Yeah. Well,
thank you. It was a pleasure.
Now I bet the sound quality was awful because I forgot to get the other speaker. That's great. I heard it.
And I did modify it slightly. Would you like me to send you the modified?
Please.
Just email it?
Yeah, that's fine. Ready. All right, that should be much better. Okay. So questions from last week.
Not really.
Okay, that's reasonable. I mean, you did all your assignments, so and you've seen your grades, so you know that I was happy with them. So that shouldn't be an issue.
But, so this week we were going to talk about nonverbal communication. And we'll have an in-class activity on Wednesday. Just to give you a heads up, there's also an assessment this week. But I think there's just the, let's just scroll down and take a look at week 3. There is the usual assignment and discussion. And there's one here that says week 3 assignment, giving a speech. That was what you just did.
Okay.
It's showing 0 because the grade from the week before will now be modified to reflect that. And then your final speech script and visuals will be due at the end of the week. I mean, Sunday, yeah, because we'll be doing them in class on next week. And then there is a short assessment, again, 4 questions, 5 points each, same as last time, and you'll have a choice of which ones you choose to answer. So that's what we have on tap for this week. But I really wanted to discuss the whole issue of nonverbal communication, because nonverbal communication has been estimated by in a number of different studies to be essentially 93% of all communication. So now, if you take a look at what are the components of nonverbal communication, what do you think those components are? I may throw a couple of wrinkles at you.
Facial expressions.
Right.
Wrinkles. Where you're putting your hands, how you're moving them, where you're facing, like making eye contact or looking elsewhere. And body gestures.
Those are a bunch of them. Body movement is known as kinesics. Facial expressions, there are several different words for different things. There's oculesics, which is how you use your eyes, whether you're looking at people, whether even though you're looking in their direction, you're actually staring at the wall behind them, that sort of thing. You can tell by the way their pupils dilate and everything else, just how closely they're paying attention to you, to your focal position. Hand gestures, there's general posture. Have you had a chance to look at any of the videos yet this week?
Not for this week.
Okay. There's several of them, and part of the discussion is a roughly 21-minute long video that you'll watch in 2 chunks by a woman, a researcher in body language by the name of Amy Cuddy.
Okay.
And she will, I've used her video actually in a couple of different classes here. I use it in professional development to get people preparing for interviews because she talks about that. Hello, Katie. Come on in.
Businessman. This is Justin, and he's just been interviewing as a history instructor.
Hello, Justin. I'm Mike.
Professor Mike.
Nice to meet you. History professor.
That's right.
Good.
And one of our students. So sometimes the classes are.
Good evening.
Thanks, you too. I don't know, did you have Pat Massingill?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Pat retired.
Oh, okay.
So he's no longer with us. Yeah.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah. He, there's a number of us who could teach history, but some of us are already teaching too many topics.
Yeah.
But anyway, so Cuddy goes through a lot of this, and she talks about posture and some of the research on postural, postural language, how we present ourselves. There's a stance that's often referred to as the Wonder Woman stance, feet a little apart, hands on the hips, staring straight ahead. That's a power stance. Now, it doesn't mean that you should walk into an interview and go,
Right, yeah.
but it does mean that, and the research has shown this quite clearly, if you actually spend, it seems kind of silly, it seems like, I sort of think, why would I do that? But stand in front of a mirror, preferably a full-length mirror, and do that, and and just do that. Concentrate on it for about 2 minutes. What it does is it actually shifts your attitude. And when you walk away, you're not, in that stance, but you have that aura. And that aura of confidence. Whereas if you sit and you're,
Yeah.
You have a totally different aura. And you can program yourself. It only takes a short while. 2 minutes is probably twice as long as it actually takes. But it only takes a short while to program yourself. There are some other things that I would, that I plan the next time I teach professional development. There's a couple of other techniques that they fixed it.
They did.
Pretty much. It's not quite level, but pretty much.
Try not to look at it.
Yeah, right. But there are some other methods of preparing, especially if you're nervous. If it's an interview that's really important. If it's a job you really want, or if you're just a new interviewee. The first time you go in for an interview, you're nervous, most people.
Oh, yeah.
So there are lots of ways we can. I introduced that one in my professional development class about a year ago, the first time I used it. And it really opened up eyes because people don't think about this. They think it's kind of silly to stand challengingly in front of a mirror. But it really works. And it works well. So there's that. And she talks general about posture and body mechanics and body and how you come across. And they're pretty good videos. They are part of the discussion. They're not part of the week's videos that are in course media. There are some others in there that are good. And it's a TEDx talk. So as usual, it's a good it's a good talk. Although we recently saw a TEDx talk with this woman who was just as flat as a board. Fascinating talk, but her demeanor, if it hadn't been such a good, well delivered talk because she threw in just the right amount of humor, you would have thought you were talking to somebody who was half dead. So it's probably one of the least exciting of those. And I've seen a few others with young kids. We have a friend. Years and years ago, we sponsored an Indian family coming to this country to go to grad school, and their son is just one of the most amazing young men in the world. He's already given 2 TEDx talks. He's not finished with college.
Awesome.
He did his first one when he was in high school. So he's quite a character. He's quite an intelligent kid. He just can't figure out what he wants to do because he's got too many fingers and too many pies. So he's struggling right now. But he and his family might be part of our Indian group that comes to Elizabeth's wedding. So, yeah. So I mean, the TED Talks are pretty good. The articles are reasonable as well. There's a lot of good information there. But body language really also comprises, or nonverbal communication, I should say, really comprises other things as well. Things like the rate of breathing and the rhythm of breathing. When you look at someone and you're in a discussion and you say something and you see their shoulders suddenly slump, you've hit something. That's they may not even know they've done it. But it's such a direct communication. I just threw something at him he doesn't like. Yeah. And another is literally our choice of the language we use is yes, language is usually verbal, and verbal includes written. So we don't usually think of our choice of language, but if you hear someone talking in a manner that is illustrative of a very strong racial attitude, racism, in their speech, it comes out and it says something about them just by their choice of words, because we have a very rich language. You can use lots of different terms. You don't have to use the stereotypical racist terms.
Right.
And yet it's a part of our language. You don't have to use profanity. I mean, when I was a kid, nobody publicly swore.
Yeah.
And now,
it's more common now.
yeah,
Yeah.
walking down the street, you hear 8-year-olds. And that just grates on me. I mean, I have to admit, I don't have the cleanest mouth on the planet. But generally speaking, in public, I try to keep my act together.
Yeah. And especially around kids. For
Yeah.
me.
Oh, children.
I have 2 of them.
Yeah. Yep. Well, we have some friends in Loveland. They have 11,
Holy cow.
and they are 11 of the nicest kids you'd ever want to meet.
That's good.
And they have rules. Out in public, they behave. At home, they're just like any other group of siblings.
Yeah.
But when they're out in public, it doesn't happen. And they follow it. We had 9 of the kids at our house on Memorial Day, and they ranged from right at 2 up to about, let's see, Andrew's almost 16,
Wow.
and he has 2 older sisters. But all of them, they took care of each other, especially the baby. You have 11 kids. Everybody's taking care of the baby, the younger ones. And
Yeah.
We actually, just in terms of those kinds of societies, we had a man stay with us for a while. He was from Cameroon.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked to him. And in the village, when you're 2, you're taking care of the babies.
Wow.
And just all the way up, you do what you can. And if you look at Amish families, at 2, they're taking care of the babies. At 3, they're putting away the dinnerware,
Yeah.
etc., all the way up the line
Mhm.
in order to make things work.
Mhm.
So, but basically, is how we raise our kids. And I hear kids swearing like that. I know what they're hearing at home,
Right. Yeah.
and that's not necessarily very useful. And there are still a lot of people who are offended by it. Now, when I went to work in the pharmaceutical industry, I worked with a whole bunch of people in a major company, and rarely did we hear anything particularly, somebody drop something on their foot, you might hear an expletive.
Yeah.
And understandable.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there was usually followed by, oh, sorry, or something like that. Then I went to work in the biotech industry, and I went to work for a company that I had already met, and I had met them at meetings and stuff when they were well behaved. Get into the company, into the lab, and all of a sudden it's like being in basic training again. So we have our choice of language. I remember when Lenny Bruce got arrested for profanity on stage, and it was considered obscenity, public obscenity, which was against the law. And he was pushing freedom of speech in a way that I thought was stupid. But nonetheless, the principle is what he was doing. But I remember that happened. And then, nowadays you don't hear, listen to who? Stephen Colbert.
Mhm.
And it's just boom, 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 bleep, 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 bleep. So, and our own president.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, it's all too common now.
yeah. So but still, in terms of public presentations, it's not considered appropriate. Okay, so our choice of language tells us a lot about who we are. So, the obscenities, the racial slurs, the other kinds of things, the language that is used by some religious figures to criticize people who don't believe the same way they do. These are all choices, and they tell us a lot about who we are. And sometimes that's not very complimentary.
Yeah.
So I used to tell people that it is never unprofessional not to swear. A triple negative, but
Yeah.
But when you think about it, that's true. Nobody's going to look at you and say, huh, you didn't swear.
Right.
But if you do, there's going to be somebody that's going to think you're allowed. So you have to watch. So our choice of language, which I consider a part of nonverbal, because it is, even though it's the language itself, but it's the making of that choice that gives us other clues as to what people are thinking, how they think, and it just isn't necessarily all that wonderful. So we have all of those. There are games that can be played, and one of the things that another part of nonverbal communication is how people can say part of a sentence, say a phrase, and other people will recognize what it means. And if you're not part of the group, say you are not a native English speaker, it's going to be meaningless to you.
Mhm.
And it's almost like a code which people can use. And people do. You see that in families.
Yeah.
There's a lot of sort of partial statements, and then everybody fills in the blank because it's part of the family way of living.
Right.
It's amazing to me how often all someone has to do is say, yeah. And that says a volume to you.
Mhm.
But that assumes that you know the person. So there are some things. I've been looking at what kind of in-class activity, and I'm probably going to have to pick out a couple of them. One of them on the hopeful event that several people show up, and one of them just in case it's, again, just you and Jessica.
Okay.
But I really want to I'd really like to play some games and have some fun with it, because it can be kind of a dry subject.
Yeah.
To be quite honest. So the whole issue of nonverbal communication, if you think about it, you can see it in your family. You can see it in your kids. How old are your children?
10 and 12.
Lots of nonverbal communication there.
Lots of eye rolls.
Yeah, that's a great one, the eye roll. But there's also there's the downturned mouth, and we see it. We recognize it first in our parents, and then we find ourselves doing it. The one raised eyebrow. There's lots of ways we can communicate. And babies really are the experts at nonverbal communication. They scream and cry when they're uncomfortable, but they also roll around and look at things, and they reach for things. And so there's a lot of, we learn to recognize in our children what they're doing. We encourage them, most of us, to start using their words as soon as they can.
Yeah.
But not always.
Mhm.
And but they have to explore their world in other ways. There's some research now that says that children put things in their mouth to identify them. You know, not just to see what they taste like.
Yeah.
But there's a connection between the tongue and the brain. Very strong connection. So kids put things in their mouths to learn about. You know, hopefully they don't stick the end of a cord plugged into the wall into their mouth.
Right.
But for the most part, it's harmless as well.
Mhm.
You know, you don't want them sticking sharp knives in their mouths or razor blades, but
Right.
you know, you also don't, if you're paying attention, you don't have them around where kids can get them before they understand the risks associated with them, that they can actually do some damage. So we have to look at how we communicate without speaking, without the use of words, or by our very choice of words. I mean, a baby going eh, and then a fly comes up. A baby, you know, pointing and making a noise. That's a good chance. That's a good time to say, "Are you looking at the chair?" You know, give them a word.
Mhm.
And of course, the bigger the family. I mean, the family that has 11 kids I was telling you about, their 2-year-old is one of the most articulate 2-year-olds I've ever seen. She has to be. And of course, she's imitating her older siblings.
Mhm.
So she's getting a lot of encouragement. And of course, being a baby, she also wants to grow up a lot faster than we wish they ever would.
Yeah.
But and so she, you know, she's imitating them. We saw the same thing with our second child. She started speaking in full sentences. She didn't go to the big truck, which is what our older daughter did.
Yeah.
And then she expanded it to big red truck. But Cherise went straight to, oh, that's a truck.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that is. Thank you. And it was because by the time she was able to start verbalizing, her older sister was using sentences. And she, by God, was not going to fall behind. So, and you probably saw that with your two.
Oh, yeah.
So it's a 2-year gap. You know, we've got a 3-year gap between our two. So that's the perfect 2 to 3 years. I think is a perfect gap.
Yeah.
And you know, I hope you're as lucky as we are. Our two, both of ours are daughters, and they are the best of friends.
Yeah. Kids get along pretty well. They
Yeah.
have to.
Oh, they'll squabble some.
Yeah.
They used to squabble,
Oh, yeah.
but
Every sibling will.
and then the older one, we pointed out to the older one that you know, you can make your sister love you, or you can make your sister hate you, and she may not even know why.
Mhm.
And she said, "Oh, okay." Decided that she wanted her sister to love and trust her.
Yep.
And that's what happened. And it was all just those clues, and the rest of it was how you interact. And so the nonverbal, you know, people will say anything you like, anything you want to hear. You know, I had I won't say a friend, an acquaintance, whose father professed to love his mother. Always just love your mother. And yet every time he had a chance, he'd go find some woman and take her to bed. And you know, what's the truth? Well, your actions speak. Actions do speak louder than words. If you love your wife,
You'd be faithful.
yeah. There's no, there's really no excuse for that. But that's partly that's my personal opinion. I'll admit, but it's also the opinion of almost all the successful marriages I know.
Yeah. Yep.
So there's a lot to be said for that.
Mhm.
And so our actions, verbal and nonverbal, and as I said, the nonverbal are about 93% of our communication. I don't think that video is in here. I probably should add it. There's a video from a woman who was, I think, a junior at Carleton College in Wisconsin, Minnesota. And she was a psychology student, and she was talking about nonverbal communication, and she was citing the research that said that. And it was kind of a shock to see it for the first time. But you think about it, and most of our communication, most of our interactions with people around us are nonverbal. A nod, a smile, a head shake. I'm at the gym. I see people there all the time. We're all there at the same time all the time.
Yeah.
So it's gotten to the point where it's hi, a nod, a smile, just an acknowledgement. Oh yeah, there you are. Good to see you. And then go on about our business.
Yep.
And so there's a lot there for us to be aware of. But that statistic shocked me. Only 7% of our communication is verbal. And that is just amazing.
Mhm.
But again, what do we do? What do we see? We see, you're standing on the street corner, waiting at the traffic light for it to cross, and there's somebody over on another corner who's just, obviously some sort of troubled human being who's yelling at the world. That's nonverbal for you, because what you're hearing is the pain and the anxiety of this human being, and the way he's acting. The same with drivers on the road. You see aggressive drivers. That says a lot to you. Among other things, get out of his way because he won't get out of yours,
Right. Yeah.
and it ain't worth it, right? So those kinds of things that we look at are a whole part of the nonverbal. And it just and I've spent a lot of time since I ran into that, looking at that aspect and thinking, wow, how is this true? I mean, and a lot of it is the wave and stuff. I mean, that those are pseudo verbal communications. When your neighbor drives by and waves at you, yeah, it's nonverbal, but it also is an acknowledgement that has an unspoken verbal component. If you were walking down the street passing at each other, you'd say something, right? So sometimes it's a substitute for the verbal, but most of the time it's not. And it's behavioral. You walk into, let's see, I was in Michael's recently to get, I don't remember, something. And I was walking down the aisle and I saw a guy standing there poring over art supplies and had a bunch of it in his cart. And, I was looking at that and I said, okay. And what that said to me, totally nonverbal, oh, the guy's an artist. Well, he might have been a teacher getting stuff for his classroom, but it's for an art project. So he's an artist. Don't have to be Van Gogh.
Yeah.
To be an artist. And I've been surprised at the number of my friends, my peer group, that's their hobby. And it just amazes me because, I wouldn't have thought of them as artists. But what's an artist look like?
Right.
right? What did Picasso look like? Kind of a goofy little character. What about Frida Kahlo? You know, you wouldn't have picked her out as anything other than another Hispanic mama to look at her,
Mhm.
and yet one of the acclaimed artists of our time. So, you know, yeah, so I just look at it, and I was reflecting on that when I saw that, because I thought, why am I assuming he's an artist? Just because he's buying art supplies. Maybe he's buying art supplies because his wife's an artist and she sent him with a shopping list.
Right.
You know? So again,
Yeah.
where do our minds go? What is this saying? We spin scenarios based on what we see and how we interpret it. Are we correct? Unless you go ask, you
Maybe
don't
not.
know, right? It can be very correct. And we do that a lot. And we need to remember that when someone comes across to us as maybe somebody we don't like, are we just misinterpreting?
Okay.
Yeah, and maybe not.
Yeah.
Maybe not. But it is something worth considering, because what we do, we have a habit. When nonverbal is so much of our communication, we have made a habit out of assuming that our assumptions are correct. And they might not be. And that's one of the things about an interview. You know, the subject of this week's discussion is postural feedback in an interview. Okay. So I made a few remarks, you know, and referred you and anybody else that does it to the Amy Cuddy videos that are in the discussion body. But also, you know, the idea that when we look at something, when we see the way people act, how they position themselves, we forget that we make an assumption that that's who they are. And that assumption, to me, is partially correct. It's who they are at that moment. Maybe they just had a fight with their wife, you know, and they're very unhappy about it.
Mhm.
You know, and maybe maybe they were wrong and they bloody well know it, and they're unhappy about it. And that just happens to be the way they're coming across, in a very negative way. And our problem with negative impressions is they stay with us. We have a habit of losing the positive in this society. And it's really hard, you know, it's really hard to change that. It takes effort.
Oh, yeah.
So I just you know, part of it is I was thinking about that when I was looking at the at the discussion this week and making my post. You know, what do we see? You know, we look at people, and person walks in and they've had a really hard day. Maybe they've pulled their back. Maybe they're in pain, and they have this foul expression on their face. Well, we're going to have a negative impression of that person. They might be one of the nicest human beings on the planet. But at that moment, they hurt. When you hurt, you generally don't grin.
Right. Yeah.
You know. So again, and we have to be careful not to let first impression be only impression, because that's dangerous too. I mean, and we all have done it. We do it all the time still, probably. I do. And I'm not afraid to admit that. But I have also learned, okay, my first impression of you is, I don't want to have anything to do with you. Yeah. If we meet again, am I going to give you a chance to prove that you're not the person I think you are? Well, I would like to think so.
Right.
And maybe I will. But if you come at me 3 or 4 times with that same attitude, I may decide that that's who you are.
Yeah.
So, and it's just like anything else. Like, we're going through this with my mother-in-law right now. couple of days ago, if you'd met her, you would have thought she was a crotchety old witch because she was being a crotchety old witch because she hurt.
Yeah.
So we finally got something done about that. And today she allowed us how she doesn't hurt near as much. And we're sitting there saying, okay, we didn't waste all that money for nothing.
Right, yeah.
But it was still, again, most people, when they met my mother-in-law, think she's wonderful. Kara out here loves her. Because there was a time my wife had to be out of town she was out of town for 2 weeks when her sister's husband died. She went to help take care of him during his last days on hospice and then stayed for, the funeral and everything when he passed on. So I had about 2 weeks when she and I were living by ourselves together, my mother-in-law.
Yeah.
So I had to bring her here because she can't be left at home.
Yeah.
And Kiera just loved her and took care of her.
Nice, good.
And, she was really happy here because she was around people who treated her like she was important.
Yeah.
And she has some self-esteem issues. That's part of the issue.
Mm.
She can't do everything she can do, so she's worthless. Well, Mother, no, I don't think we feel that way.
Right.
But try to convince her of that. Not easy.
Yeah, yeah.
So let's take a break, and then we'll come back and see what else we're going to do this evening.
Okay.
Might just turn you loose to work on assignments for the rest of the evening when you don't have family around to distract you.
Yeah. Getting a root canal tomorrow
Ugh.
too. So.
Ugh.
And I sent you an email, but the attachments weren't on it, so I'm fixing that right now.
Oh, okay. I haven't checked my email since you sent it, so I'm going to. Okay, so let's go ahead and restart. The subject of nonverbal language is rather enormous, but the focus of this week's assignment, our discussion, is on postural feedback. So basically, when we're talking about postural feedback, it's how it's the nonverbal feedback that comes from how a person is holding themselves. And the feedback doesn't necessarily have to be to anything that you say. It can just be the impression that you're given. So the object here is to look at, what's good feedback, what's bad feedback, what are the consequences of bad feedback, what are the consequences of good feedback, et cetera. So I think the discussion, I'm going to leave it at that, leave it a little wide open so you can search around and do some thinking on it. So I don't have anything else to say about that.
Okay.
The rest of it is, your final speech and your basically, that assignment of doing the usual, looking at telling me what you've learned from the videos and the readings. So maybe at this point it's a good time to look at the structure of these classes. We are anticipated to provide about 15 hours a week of outside activities outside the class, 15 to 20, really, which is one of the reasons that there's a lot of reading. I mean, there's no text in this class, so we have to use these online resources that are available. And many of them are excellent. There's been a lot of, I've gone through them. Obviously, someone put a lot of time into making certain that they weren't just trivial wastes of time,
Right.
that they actually had something to say. The problem with not having a textbook, it may seem kind of weird, but this is a public speaking class. I don't know that there are any really good textbooks for public speaking.
Probably not.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there are, but I'm certain they're also probably about 30 years old at this point. And and public speaking, given technology, has changed so much. I mean, a person can publicly bring in videos, and PowerPoints have been around for a while in one form or another. The old overhead projector things that we used to put on slides, they're basically PowerPoint. They've been around for a long time. But the ability to link in videos, demonstrations, the ability to take your camera, your phone, and videotape something and show it in a class is just, these are technologies that weren't even dreamed of really when I was in school. And they've really changed the way that we do all these. When I was doing a lot of presentations when I was in the pharmaceutical industry, we had PowerPoint. I remember the first time I did a major presentation at a meeting, I had to use overhead slides, printed slides, overhead slides that were used because we didn't have PowerPoint. And then when PowerPoint came along, it was kind of crude. You basically had something that had a computerized version of your slides, which was great. Certainly a lot easier than carrying around 4 pounds of plastic with you when you go to a meeting. But visual aids will be part of next week as well. But the issue is that we've changed all these technologies in ways that no one ever dreamed of. We can make movies. I record classes and upload them to YouTube. 10 years ago, you what?
Right.
Right? And the idea that I could record a class and have it be meaningful. I hope meaningful. Anyway, have the material as presented in class available to someone who couldn't be in class. That was just unheard of. And I've learned a lot. I guess maybe I'm living proof that you can't teach an old dog new tricks. I've learned a lot about doing these things. And sometimes I think they're kind of silly. PowerPoint is not used by most people effectively. You did a good job of just having a couple of points and then elaborating. That's what PowerPoint is for.
Visuals.
Yeah. And it's to help you as much as anything else. It's also to help the audience take notes. And it also helps you keep on track. But you have to be prepared. A lot of people will just throw up a PowerPoint and read it. Well, la-di-da, we all can read. So why even bother to run your mouth? Just put them up there and say, okay, next slide.
Yeah.
And let people read it. So in reality, the people who use it best are those who use it as a reminder and as a tool for bringing in other things. The fact that we can embed videos now in PowerPoint, of course, didn't exist in the original PowerPoint.
Yeah.
But we can embed these things and other kinds of media, music and so forth, in them. And I don't care about the flash and dash for how you switch slides. That's just, we have fun with that. But it can be. But it's really just a little bit of difference from the let's go to the next slide. And quite frankly, I don't use that very much because I just haven't bothered to spend my time learning it. I learned what I wanted to know, which is my limitation, but I did it. But anyway, we've changed it. Now I know how to convert things into YouTube. I have filmed myself and uploaded that to YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
And it, just, and mainly just to learn how to do it. But I can also go back. I have software on my computer at home that is open source, that I can go back and edit that video, add special effects. And it's kind of interesting.
Mm-hmm.
It's also, to me, because it's not, it's sort of like, okay, so what? It is not something that terribly interests me. So I know how to do it. And if I have to in the future, I can do it. But the fact that the technology is there. When the personal computer first came out, and I mean not the toys, the Osborne and the other really early microcomputers,
Right.
but those that actually had more functionality. Many of them were custom built.
Mm-hmm.
And we used them when I was in the pharmaceutical industry. We used them to control equipment and to program it to come on and go off and change parameters and whatever else.
Mm-hmm.
And that was good. Now, of course, anyone without a computer is cut off from the world.
Basically.
And we're in a transition state. My sister and her husband want nothing to do with computers. So they only recently got cell phones.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard for us to communicate with them because they live on the East Coast and we have to pick a time when they're going to be available to talk. Well, usually by the time we're available to talk, they're asleep.
Yeah.
So if you're without this new technology, you're sort of sidelined.
Yeah.
You're sidelined in the society.
Well, I can see that because my dad, he doesn't know how to use a computer.
Yeah, mine too. But my 98-year-old mother-in-law has a computer and uses it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what does she do? Email. She is in communication with people, and she does Facebook, which
That's
always
impressive.
blew me away.
That
I
age.
don't
Yeah.
do Facebook.
Yeah.
But, it's a case of you adapt, or eventually you're just gone, and, the world moves on. And so the technologies that we have changed presentations. They can be exciting. Used to be you'd go to a presentation, okay, he's going to have 22 slides, that's the standard, blah, 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 blah. And you knew it. And so that was normal. Now you go to a presentation, you expect animations, you expect all sorts of things, especially if you're in business. I mean, business people seem to love to do all these cool things with their presentations, when there are many of us who say, just give me the data.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to show it to me graphically, that's even better. But don't have these graphs that gradually grow while you talk. And that's, it's okay, but it doesn't help me because I grasp in the gestalt. Other people don't think the same way I do.
Yeah.
But I get it, by looking at the picture. I can understand the picture.
Mm-hmm.
And if I don't, I'll ask a question and then understand the picture. But that's the way I think. Other people need other ways.
Mm-hmm.
My wife doesn't think the same way at all. And at times there's real communication issues. Maybe we should take this class together. Anyway, but there's some real communication issues because I make big leaps of logic. She does too, but her leaps of logic are in other areas.
Mm-hmm.
So we miss out sometimes.
Yeah.
And that's something that we both recognize. And so we've been, we deal with it. But it does change the way you interact quite a bit. So, but the nonverbal, and how long have you been married?
14 years.
Yeah, so you know there's a lot of nonverbal communication
Oh, yeah.
between you and your husband.
Mhm.
Same with us. A look, a gesture, whatever. So we have a lot of those kinds of things. And when you realize that nonverbal communication is the vast majority, it changes your relationship with it. At least it did for me. It made me think, what am I saying when I do such and such? And it made me understand a source of conflict. My wife would say something, and I would react non-verbally. And she thought I was mad at her. When in reality, I'm saying to myself, oh, you did it again. And it was me.
Right.
So when then we had that discussion, that changed again everything.
Mhm.
Understanding our nonverbals.
Yep.
So anyway, do you have any thoughts about nonverbal communication?
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily.
No. It's a big aspect of communication. And you can take things differently. Like you may mean, wow, that's interesting, and the person takes it as, wow, you don't like what I just said. Type thing.
Yeah.
So.
Has to do with your body language.
Mm-hmm. And your prerogative.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. That's the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, okay, so the rest of this week, we'll have an in-class activity on Wednesday, I hope. We'll have other people here. If not, we'll figure out something to do. I'll have a backup plan.
Okay.
Always have a plan B, which I didn't come in with today because I didn't have time to develop it.
Mm-hmm.
But that's all right. It never occurred to me that it would just be the two of us. Pardon?
We made it work.
Yeah, of course, of course. So there's really nothing much else to talk about right now. The subject of next week's class, next week's discussions and so forth will be basically visual aids. So we'll wait until we have more people in the room to start into that topic because it can be pretty broad.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of caveats. But what I was thinking, it is now 7:30. We're supposed to, we have another hour of class. So I was going to say, why don't I just turn you loose and let you work on stuff.
Okay.
And anyone else who's listening to this, work on stuff. You all have work to do. So I'm going to end this video. And in order for me to know that you've watched it, the email should have the code word PERTH, P-E-R-T-H, PERTH. So that's the end of class, formal class for tonight. And Carol Ann's going to work on her assignments, and I'm going to work on a bunch of other stuff that I need to catch up on. So we will see, I hope, more people on Wednesday.